Cheech and Chong are known as the kings of stoner comedy because of their hazy jokes and great chemistry as a comedy duo. But there's a world of strange turns and awkward starts behind the bong jokes in cult great movies. But we're not just beginning to look into this. Because most people don't know about a lot more. This is a true story that shows two people can make something magical together even if they don't get along at first. Stay with us until the end, because the last few facts will shock you the most. Let's start. How the two met. The story of how Cheech and Chong met is one of those real-life events that seems almost too strange to be true, but it is. And the fact that their long, funny career began in a topless bar in Vancouver only adds to how strangely brilliant it all is. You must have heard that most comic pairs either grew up on the same block or became friends over schoolyard jokes, right? But not these two. Before fate put Richard Cheech, Maron, and Tommy Chong in the same smoky room and then on the same stage, their lives couldn't have been more different. It's true that Cheech wasn't planning on a life full of pot jokes and punchlines. Really? Being funny wasn't even on his mind. Cheech was born in South Los Angeles to a police officer father. His life had gone in a very different direction. He learned how to make pottery. He went to California State University, Northridge, because he wanted to learn about clay wheels and kilns, not get standing ovations. But things were crazy in the late 1960s, especially for young American guys. Every choice was weighed against the draft for the Vietnam War. So, Cheech did something brave when he thought he might be sent overseas to fight a war he didn't believe in. He ran away to Canada. He would say in the end, "I didn't want to get killed in Vietnam." He didn't choose to avoid the draft, but it put him in Vancouver at the right time. He didn't know it yet, though. Do you think Cheech and Chong were just two high people who got lucky? Not so fast. Their real story keeps getting stranger and stranger. Wait until the end, because, for starters, no one ever talks about it. Not having a clear plan for living in a new place wasn't easy. Cheech worked any job he could find to make money. He worked as a truck driver and an unloader for rugs along with making pottery. His life was a mess and it wasn't clear what would happen, but he kept going. He then went to a nearby club one night to find any kind of work that would keep him going. And that's where his fate was waiting for him, even though it probably didn't look very exciting at first. Tommy Chong was on the other end of this funny birth story. Tommy's own life had already been very interesting. His father was Chinese and his mother was Scottish-Irish. He was born in Edmonton, Alberta, and had already achieved some fame, but not as a comedian, but as a singer. Motown signed a band he was in called Bobby Taylor and the Vancouvers, where he played guitar. But by the 1970s, Tommy had left the music scene and started a different kind of business. That could have been its own story. He ran a bar in Vancouver's Chinatown called the Shanghai Junk that didn't have a roof. But Tommy wasn't content to run any old topless bar. Not at all, he wanted something else. So he mixed burlesque with performance art, making the Shanghai Junk something between a strip club and a comedy theater. City Works is the name of his sketch group. In between the dancers' routines, they do short comedic acts. That's a pretty strange mix, right? But it worked in some way. Tommy liked to try new things and push the limits, and this setup let him do both. So, late one night in 1970, Cheech went to the Shanghai Junkyard to look for work. Anything. His goal wasn't to be funny. He only had rent to pay. Tom looked at him and thought, why not? Something about Cheech felt right. It could have been his vibe, his energy, or the way he timed things. Tommy asked him to join the comedy group no matter what. That's when things got magic. There was no denying their energy, but at first, neither of them knew what they had found. They began to riff off of each other during a show one night and ended up in a bit about a man looking for his friend Dave. What's the joke? What was that other guy saying? Dave's not here? He was so high. It wasn't planned. They didn't practice it. It happened right now. But the crowd went crazy. Tomas would say that it was all a mistake, but aren't the best things in life sometimes? That one act, which came about out of the blue, became their first big hit and showed them what they could do when they worked together. They saw that they weren't just funny. They were fun to watch together. That doesn't happen very often. They did shows together night after night, and over time, their acts changed. Toy played the chill hippie who looked like he lived in a cloud of smoke. Cheech was the sly one who talked quickly and was full of energy. They were both great at playing their roles. Seeing both sides of the same stoner coin was interesting. As word spread about them in Vancouver, it became clear that they were unique. After only a few months, they chose to quit the club and go on the road as a comedy duo. At that point, they were known as Cheech and Chong, which made them a symbol of counterculture humor. The things they wrote were risky, sarcastic, and not at all like what other people were writing at the time. They were not just joking. They were getting into the minds of a whole generation. And it all began because there was one guy avoiding the draft, and there was another putting on a comedy show in a bar with no roof. Who would have thought? From there, their popularity went through the roof. After putting out records and going on tours across the US, they made movies that became cult classics. But the main point of their story never changed, even as they became more famous. The story was always about two very different people who met in the strangest place and changed the way people laugh. What a surprise! You won't believe that things weren't always as calm as they seemed. On TV, the ups and downs of Cheech and Chang's relationship were just as different in real life as they were on screen. So what did the two really say to each other when the scene was over? You should watch all the way through because the truth might shock you. Offstage, they had a love-hate relationship. For all the famous stoner jokes, unforgettable movie scenes, and loud laughter in packed theaters, Cheech Marin and Tommy Chang's friendship was not at all the carefree bromance that fans thought it was. They looked like they couldn't be separated on screen, two funny sides of the same strange coin, but their relationship was tense behind the scenes. Over the course of almost 20 years, they had artistic differences and times of real tension. That's right, the public only saw the finished result and not the mess that was going on behind the scenes. Why did things fall apart so badly if they were such a great team? That's what Cheech and Tommy's story slowly starts to answer. If you can get past the weed smoke and laughing, Cheech Marin's autobiography says that he and Chong were never really best friends in the traditional sense. Cheech said that their relationship was more like that of brothers, not necessarily because they loved each other, but because they had been together for a long time and had a strange kind of respect for each other. We are related. He wrote, "We're not best friends," showing that they had two sides to their relationship. One minute they would fight so badly it was scary, and the next they would do a perfect comedy act like it was nothing. Doesn't that sound like a lot of mental stress? But for them, that was just how their relationship worked. Cheech said that the way they work together is like how pearls are made. There is an irritation inside the shell that, when pressed, turns into a beautiful gem. Is it possible that the thing that made them laugh so much was also the thing that was breaking them up? Cheech thought that their chemistry on stage and in movies wasn't always based on deep friendship or respect for each other. It came sometimes anyway. He remembered that they would still be able to act as if nothing had happened, even when there were fights and egos on stage. It might seem like a great skill to be able to separate their personal problems from how they spoke professionally, but it also hinted at the problems that were bubbling just below the surface. In the end, Cheech said that their back and forth felt like a push and pull. You asked your brother to be quiet sometimes. There were times when you needed him to look out for you. Being on an emotional roller coaster all the time was funny, but it also made for a pretty unstable relationship. What part did ego play in how this all fell apart? If you ask both men, it's a pretty big one. One big disagreement was over who should have power over the creative process. Both were listed as writers on all 6 of their big movies from 1978 to 1984, but Tommy Chong directed 4 of them. This mismatch wasn't just a small thing for Cheech. It turned into a very touchy thing, as he said elsewhere. He thought that his own creative efforts were being ignored or given less attention than they deserved. Chong may have said that the setting was a strategic trade-off, but Cheech couldn't ignore how that made the power dynamic on set unfair. The stress got so bad at one point that it showed up on the screen. In a documentary, Chong told Cheech straight out that he never really deserved to be called a director. Isn't that a pretty strong accusation? Cheech wasn't going to take it. He shot back, "That's not true. I set the tone just as much as you did." Hearing them fight over credit may have been shocking or even depressing to longtime fans, but it gave a much more accurate picture of how they worked together. After all, isn't there bound to be some kind of conflict when two creative minds meet and both believe they know best? Things went wrong for them as their fame grew. It looked like things changed in the early 1980s, especially when Nice Dreams was being made in 1981. That's when Cheech thought things began to change in a more hostile way. He says that Chong became more and more dominating. He wanted to write, direct, and make all the important decisions. That made Cheech feel like he was pushed out of a creative process that he had helped build from the start. It wasn't a relationship anymore. More like a one-man show, with Cheech as the support act. How long could a group last if one person feels like they are not being seen? In 1985, it was the last blow. Their record, Get Out of My Room, had just come out. It was also important to Cheech that Chong help him record his song Born in East LA. Cheech was really excited about this project. But Chong said no. He didn't want to take part. And because of that choice, they could no longer be a comedy team after 17 years. Cheech went ahead and made the song and the movie that went with it all by himself. It was a great solo project, both with critics and with audiences. But there was a deep rift that had finally opened up under all that success. After some time had passed, Chong looked back with some clarity and maybe a little humility and accepted that the end of their partnership was probably his fault. His words showed that he had grown a bit haughty. He found it hard to give up directing once he felt the power that came with it. Many directors get caught in a trap when they start to believe their own talk, which he called your words, God. It seems almost sad, doesn't it? The job that let him be creatively free also turned into the thing that made them fight. That doesn't mean they never ran into each other again. Over the years, they got back together a few times, sometimes for tours and sometimes for interviews or films, but their relationship never quite got back to how it was when they were at their best. Cheech even said out loud that there was still a lot of anger between them when they got back in touch. It wasn't like turning on a switch and becoming friends again right away. It takes time to heal, especially if the cuts are from decades ago. However, most people still think of Cheech and Chong as the mellow, stoner characters they played on TV. There's a lot more to their story than just smoke and jokes. It's true that these two have had successful lives in fields other than comedy. They've each done amazing things that might surprise you. Stay tuned because you won't want to miss the next part, which is about how their trips took unexpected turns. They have made a lot more than just stoner humor. Cheech and Chong are known as the kings of stoner entertainment by many over the years. The laid-back pair whose pot-fueled pranks made people laugh out loud in theaters. And brought weed culture to the public eye long before it was cool. But that's not all there is to them. There's a much bigger, more interesting story to tell. Because behind the smoke and jokes, Cheech Marin and Tommy Chong have quietly built careers in show business that go far beyond the bong. Their skills have actually taken them to places you might not have thought. Drawing. There's professional wrestling, political activity, and even making serious documentaries. Who are Cheech and Chong when they're not making jokes about weed? You might be surprised by the answer. First, let's talk about voice acting, which is easy to forget. Now, most fans probably don't think of cartoon movies when they hear the names Cheech and Chong. But both men have made very good names for themselves in that field. One singer whose voice is easy to recognize is Cheech Marin. His voice is smooth, a little raspy, and full of charm. Disney saw it for sure. In The Lion King, one of the most famous animated movies of all time, Cheech played the lively hyena Banzai. You may have heard him as Ramon if you've seen any of the Cars movies. The cool and stylish low bike. That's not all, though. Cheech also did voice work for Fern Gully, The Last Rainforest. He played Stump, a smart and funny beetle who shares the screen with Robin Williams' Bat character. Wow, who would have thought that one of the biggest names in cannabis entertainment would work with the genie? You can bet that Tommy Chong didn't do nothing either. You might not hear his voice as often, but it's just as strong. He made a weird little spot for himself on South Park, the long-running and widely root animated show. And he didn't play someone else, he played himself. Cherokee Hair Tampons was the name of an episode where played a made-up version of himself in a plot that made fun of traditional medicine and New Age health ideas. It was funny, strange, and very South Park. It also showed that Chong could have fun with himself and still give a good act. Cheech and Chong have voiced a wide range of characters, from family-friendly ones to raunchy ones. This shows how versatile they are in ways that many of their fans may not have thought. But motion wasn't the only strange direction they went in. Cheech and Chong went into professional wrestling, which was one of the most unexpected turns in their lives. In March 2010, the famous pair was a guest host on WWE Raw, which is the biggest show in the world of wrestling entertainment. You might be wondering why two pros at Pot Comedy were on a wrestling show. Making noise about their Get It Legal tour, of course. But more than that, they brought the ring their usual wild energy and silly fun. They even did a piece with wrestler Santino Marella, which quickly went from funny to ridiculous when they found marijuana in his herbal tea. As you might expect, the whole thing was silly, but it also showed how flexible they were. There was no place where Cheech and Chong didn't feel right. They were at home in comedy clubs, cartoon studios, and sports stadiums. The more important part of their story doesn't get as much attention. Both Cheech Marin and Tommy Chong have grown into more than just comedians over the years. These actors have become activists, lending their voices to films about health and politics that are more than just funny. One great example is the highly personal documentary AOKAA Tommy Chong, which shows how Tommy was arrested and charged by the US government for selling glass pipes and bonds online. Some people might have just written it off as a famous scandal, but the movie showed how the harmful substance war affected a lot of people and how it was applied unfairly. A lot of people thought the case was political and pointless, and that it showed how the system could punish someone for who they were instead of what they did. By talking about it, showed a serious and reflective side that fans didn't usually see him show on stage. What does this all mean when we talk about Chong and Cheech? Simply calling them stoner comedians is not at all what they are about. These artists have changed a lot over the years. They used to do slapstick sketches about smoking joints, but now they make serious points about things like justice, public health, and personal growth. Behind the laughs is a history of coming up with new ideas, being strong, and being honest. And believe us, there's still a lot more to find. Stay put. Let's talk about 5 amazing facts about Cheech and Chong that you probably didn't know. You'll want to watch all the way to the end to see the most shocking reveal of all. There are 4 amazing facts about Cheech and Chong that you probably didn't know. To begin, it looked like they were almost in a Friday the 13th movie. Most of the time, people just nod and smile when they talk about famous comedy pairs. But when Cheech Marin and Tommy Chong join the talk, there is a thick cloud of smoke and nostalgia that makes it hard to hear the laughter. Cheech and Chong were more than just funny people. They were a trend in fashion, a stoner revolution in bell-bottoms and bandanas. Yes, their movies were crazy, funny, and silly in the best way possible. But what most people don't know is how many weird and wonderful things happened behind the scenes while they were famous. When you hear these stories, you can't help but wonder how much stranger things could have become. First, let's talk about something really cool. Cheech and Chong almost got roles in a Friday the 13th movie. No, really, can you picture that? Picture Jason Voorhees in his hockey mask lumbering through the woods until he comes across 2 chill stoners running a weed farm by chance in the middle of nowhere. The director of Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, Tom McLaughlin, actually came up with that idea. After McLaughlin's movie brought the slasher genre some much-needed new life in 1986, he had an idea that was risky, a little crazy, and kind of clever. He told producer Frank Mancuso Jr. about a crossover in which Cheech and Chong would meet, or more correctly, hang out with Jason. Setting up? Either the two would be running a marijuana business in the woods, or they would be new camp leaders who had no idea what they were doing. No matter what happened, there would have been chaos and laughter. 2. The joke about the license plates came from a real police officer. You thought you knew everything? That's not the only strange story they have stored. Talk about the MOFDVR license plate in Up in Smoke, which is one of their most famous movie scenes. That naughty little thing has become one of the most famous visual jokes in the history of stoner movies. But most fans don't know this little secret. It wasn't Cheech and Chong's idea at all. Where that plate came from, it belongs to a real police officer. That's right. The special MUFDVR plate wasn't something made up by an art department in film. In a strange twist, the plate belonged to a real Los Angeles police officer who probably didn't enjoy the duo's comedy that was driven by cannabis as much as they liked it. This plate has been on a long trip. It all began on an ordinary American Motors Gremlin. Yes, it's the same type of car that's the punchline of many jokes about cars. From there, it went to a sleek T-top Corvette, which made it instantly cooler, and finally it chose a VW Bug that had been modified. That Bug would move the plate around until it was finally taken out of use in 1986. And you won't believe it, but the first owner still has those plates, California DMV stickers and all. This is one of those strange turns of events where the real life is even stranger than the movie. And really, isn't that what Cheech and Chong are all about? Their whole career. It seems like there are a lot of random events, jokes, and vague memories that kept turning into pop culture gold. There was something silly and dangerous going on behind the funny voices, the over-the-top antics, and the clouds of smoke. They didn't just push the limits, they locked them up. The strange and wonderful stories about them are made even more interesting by the fact that they almost faced off against one of horror's most famous slashers or made a police officer's license plate famous in movie history without meaning to. If someone says that comedy is simple or easy, or that stoner humor can't be culturally deep, you could suggest that they watch Cheech and Chong. You see, there's a weird, interesting background behind the jokes and laughs about weed that most people have never heard. And really, doesn't that make watching their movies again even more fun? What other strange secrets are still out there, waiting to come out of the shadows and into the light? Third, Jack Nicholson laughed even though his shoulder was out of place. People have always loved Jack Nicholson's big personality and famous movie career. But even for someone as big as him, there are some stories that make you wonder, did that really happen? One of those stories that will stay with you is about how he reacted to seeing a comedy movie and laughed through pain. Lou Adler, the director, says that Nicholson was in bad shape when he showed up to see an early screening of the stoner classic Up in Smoke. Why? He was hurt in a car crash and had to have surgery to fix his shoulder. Yes, a shoulder that isn't in place. Now, anyone who has ever been hurt, even slightly, knows how hard it is to laugh when you're hurt. So picture yourself as Jack Nicholson, sitting in a theater. He was trying not to move around too much and definitely not to laugh, because any laugh, giggle, or chuckle would send sharp shocks through his arm. What about him? Did that stop him from acting? Not at all. Adler was sure that Nicholson had been told not to laugh, even by a doctor, but he just couldn't help himself. When the joke was funny, Nicholson would make these sounds without meaning to grunts, groans, and a chorus of uhs and ohs. The laughter hurt, but it came anyway. In a strange way, those responses became a kind of gauge for the directors. There was no doubt that a joke was good if it could make someone laugh through pain. His discomfort turned into one of the most honest ways to test the crowd that you could imagine. It's crazy that something so painful could also be so useful. Also, here's an interesting side point. That well-known, beat-up Volkswagen Beetle that Tommy Chong drove at the beginning of the movie wasn't just a set prop. In fact, it was Jack Nicholson's real car. Just picture Jack driving around Los Angeles in that cool little car before it was used in movies. Their Nice Dreams story was 3.5 pages long. When we talk about how Cheech and Chong make movies, did you know that their way of making movies can be just as strange as their comedy? Let's look at their 1981 movie Nice Dreams. The script, if you can even call it that, was said to be only 3.5 pages long. Yes, only 3.5 minutes, not 30 or 300. That's just enough time to write down the main idea, some visual clues, and a rough idea of where to go next. At first, they thought they would play gardeners who were growing marijuana all over Los Angeles in secret. Think about it. Cheech and Chong, cutting back plants during the day and picking buds at night. But, like many of their other projects, that idea turned into something even stranger and funnier, a story about selling pot from an ice cream truck with a big clown face on top. Even though the story wasn't very long, don't think that they just made it up as they went along. It may look like their comedy was a mess on screen, but they were actually very careful with their physical comedy and visual jokes. The storyboards for the whole movie were very detailed. Everything from the pratfalls to the chase scenes and the funny parts was thought out in advance. It's pretty cool when you think about it. How is it that a movie that seems so free and wild is actually so well put together? But that's what makes Cheech and Chong so funny. Behind the scenes, it was anything but easy, but they made it look easy. This is the end of the movie. Thanks for seeing. If you liked this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to get more. Click on the movie that comes up next to read more exciting stories.